Have you ever wondered what lurks in the shadows of your local fast food restaurant after dark? In 1997, the employees of several Tennessee establishments discovered the chilling answer to that question. As a series of brutal murders transformed these ordinary workplaces into scenes of unspeakable horror. Picture this: a quiet night shift at your local restaurant, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the mundane routine of closing duties, when suddenly, an ordinary evening transforms into a nightmare that would haunt Tennessee for decades to come. Between February and April 1997, these familiar sanctuaries of quick meals and minimum wage jobs became hunting grounds for one of America's most methodical serial killers. Welcome to True Crime Stories Archive, your gateway to the chilling world of real-life horror. Here, we delve into the darkest corners of humanity, unearthing terrifying stories of true crime that will leave you sleeping with the lights on. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to join our community of true crime enthusiasts and hit that notification bell to never miss an upload. The story we're about to uncover isn't just another true crime tale. It's a journey into the mind of Paul Dennis Reed, Jr., a man whose failed dreams of country music stardom spiraled into a bloody rampage that claimed 7 innocent lives. But before we dive into the horrific events of 1997, we need to understand the twisted path that led to these senseless murders. Our story begins in Richland Hills, a modest suburb northeast of Fort Worth, Texas. The year was 1957, and the small town of 8,000 residents was undergoing a transformation from rural farmland to residential suburb. Driven by the expansion of weapon manufacturing plants during World War II, it was into this changing landscape that Paul Dennis Reed Jr. was born on November 12, 1888, marking the beginning of a life that would eventually be defined by violence and tragedy. From his very first breath, Paul's life seemed marked by adversity. He entered the world with a deformed ear that resulted in significant hearing loss, a condition that would later contribute to his social isolation. He wasn't alone in his family unit, though, sharing his early years with 2 older sisters, Linda and Janet, under the care of both parents, at least initially. The fragile stability of Paul's early childhood shattered when he was just 3 years old. His parents' marriage crumbled under the weight of his father's abusive behavior, leading to a divorce that would splinter the family unit in ways that would have far-reaching consequences. While his sister Linda remained with their mother, Paul and Janet found themselves living with their father and grandmother, setting the stage for a childhood marked by neglect and escalating behavioral issues. Paul's father, working as a private investigator specializing in car repossession, was rarely present in the household. His frequent absences, coupled with his struggles with alcoholism, left the children's grandmother as their primary caregiver. However, she proved ill-equipped to handle the challenging behavior that Paul began to exhibit with alarming frequency. Even before reaching school age, Paul's conduct ventured into disturbing territory. His early acts of delinquency included theft, with the young boy regularly pilfering mail from neighbors' boxes and stealing clothes from their clotheslines. But these relatively minor infractions were merely a prelude to more sinister behavior. The true extent of Paul's troubled nature emerged through several deeply troubling incidents. In what can only be described as an act of calculated malice, he deliberately placed tacks in his grandmother's soup. This wasn't merely childish mischief, but rather an early indication of a darker psychological pattern forming within his young mind. Perhaps most chilling was an incident that could have ended in tragedy. Paul barricaded his grandmother in her bedroom and set fire to her bed while she was still in it. Through what can only be described as miraculous circumstances, She survived this attempted act of violence. Yet, incomprehensibly, these actions went largely without consequence or proper intervention. The litany of disturbing behavior reached its nadir with an act of animal cruelty that would later be recognized by criminal psychologists as a classic warning sign of future violence. Paul took his grandmother's dog and, in an act of unfathomable cruelty, beat the helpless animal to death with a baseball bat. Adding to this troubling psychological profile, Paul's early years were marked by significant physical trauma. At age 5, he suffered his first major head injury when a brick struck him, either through accident or deliberate action, at a construction site. This would prove to be just the first in a series of head traumas that would punctuate his development. His educational journey began unusually late, with Paul not entering formal schooling until age 7. This delayed start, combined with his existing challenges, immediately raised red flags among education professionals. The school psychologist's evaluation revealed significant brain dysfunction, manifesting in impaired judgment and inappropriate behavior that would plague his academic career. At age 8, Paul was transferred to an all-boys Catholic school in Houston, Texas, an institution that would later transform into a facility for neglected children, perhaps foreshadowing the troubled nature of its former student. This period of his life coincided with a series of devastating head injuries that would further complicate his already complex psychological profile. The first major accident occurred when Paul was 14. While riding his minibike, he suffered a catastrophic crash that resulted in a skull fracture, necessitating an extended hospital stay. Before he could fully recover from this trauma, fate dealt another cruel blow. In a separate incident, a car collision sent him flying from his bike, his head making violent contact with the windshield. These successive traumas would later become crucial points of discussion in debates about his mental competency. The deterioration of Paul's home life reached a critical point when his father, overwhelmed by his son's increasingly problematic behavior, attempted to put him up for adoption. This rejection by his own father led to a brief period where Paul's mother stepped in, taking him into her home at age 15. However, this arrangement would prove short-lived. Within a year, Paul's presence in his mother's home became untenable. His behavior escalated to attempted assault against his mother, and more disturbingly, he made sexual assault attempts against his sister. These weren't isolated incidents. Similar attempts had been made against his other sister as well, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior that would only worsen with time. Cast out at 16, Paul began accumulating a juvenile record that read like a preview of his adult crimes. Auto theft, check forgery, and assault marked his teenage years, painting a picture of an increasingly dangerous individual operating without restraint or remorse. By the early 1980s, Paul had somehow managed to enter into marriage, despite his sister's desperate warnings to his bride about his violent tendencies. This relationship, like so many aspects of his life, would be marked by criminal behavior and instability. While married, Paul's criminal behavior escalated dramatically. He faced charges of aggravated robbery, but managed to evade prison time through a calculated display of mental incompetence. His courtroom antics during competency hearings bordered on theatrical, falling backwards in his chair, shooting paper with rubber bands, and fashioning paper hats which he placed on his lawyer's head. Yet observers noted a telling detail. This erratic behavior only manifested when the jury was present. In their absence, Paul displayed remarkable lucidity. Despite his performances, his facade crumbled when both the prosecutor and judge saw through his act. The result was a 20-year prison sentence for aggravated robbery. However, in what would prove to be a tragic miscalculation of justice, he served only 7 years before being released on parole. During his incarceration, his marriage dissolved, adding another layer of instability to his already chaotic life. The prison environment seemed to exacerbate Paul's paranoid tendencies. He developed elaborate delusions about government surveillance, convinced that a shadowy organization he called scientific technology was monitoring and controlling his mind. These paranoid beliefs led him to write letters to both the Texas governor and the Washington Post, claiming he had been under government surveillance since 1985. Upon his release, Paul's life continued its downward spiral. In 1990, he suffered another significant head trauma in a car accident that left him unconscious and with a severe concussion. This incident added to his already extensive history of brain injuries, further complicating questions about his mental state. The depth of Paul's deterioration became painfully apparent at his father's funeral in May 1997. While others mourned, Paul arrived wearing a lime green shirt, shorts, and tennis shoes, topped incongruously with a Burger King crown. He insisted on being addressed as King Paul, displaying a disconnect from reality that disturbed even those familiar with his erratic behavior. His personal relationships continued to be marked by violence and instability. In 1994, Paul somehow managed to enter into another relationship, moving in with a girlfriend who would later describe living with him as walking on eggshells. The relationship reached a horrifying climax when Paul, in a fit of rage, threw her cat across the room before attempting to smother her with a pillow, releasing his grip only at the last possible moment. His sister Linda lived in constant fear of his death threats, while his other sister Janet would later testify about sexual assault attempts and knife-point threats meant to silence her. These strained family relationships and mounting personal failures led Paul to make a dramatic decision. He would relocate to Nashville to pursue dreams of becoming a country music star. To support himself while chasing this unlikely ambition, Paul secured employment as a dishwasher at Shoney's, an American diner chain. It was here that the seeds of his future crimes began to take root. He approached 2 co-workers with a chilling proposition, discussing the possibility of robbing fast food restaurants at night when witnesses would be scarce. His meager $100 weekly salary had apparently sparked darker ambitions. Whether or not his co-workers encouraged these plans remains unclear, but Paul moved forward independently. He methodically acquired his arsenal, purchasing a .32 caliber revolver from a pawn shop, followed by 2 .25 caliber automatic handguns. When questioned by the seller about these multiple purchases, Paul fabricated a story about dissatisfaction with the first weapon's performance, all while maintaining possession of all 3 firearms. The catalyst for his killing spree came in February 1997, when Paul's volatile temper led to him throwing a dish at a fellow employee during his shift at Shoney's. This incident resulted in his immediate termination, a seemingly routine workplace disciplinary action that would trigger a chain of events leading to multiple murders. Enraged by his firing and facing financial pressure, Paul targeted Captain D's, another fast food establishment in Tennessee. His first visit came just before closing time, when he entered through the exit door and inquired about employment opportunities. Told to return the following afternoon, Paul instead appeared the next morning, February 16, at approximately 8:50 a.m., before the restaurant had opened. Through some form of persuasion, Paul convinced the manager, Steve Hampton, to let him inside. An eyewitness later reported seeing Paul holding what appeared to be a resume during their interaction, a detail that would prove crucial in understanding his methodology. Once inside, the situation quickly turned deadly. Paul secured the door, drew his weapon, and forced both Hampton and Sarah Jackson, a 16-year-old morning shift employee, into the restaurant's walk-in cooler. In an act of senseless brutality, Paul forced both victims to lie face down on the floor before unleashing a barrage of gunshots, ending their lives without provocation or mercy. After the murders, he methodically looted the premises, taking $7,000 from the cash register and an additional $600 from Steve Hampton's wallet, money that had been earmarked for Hampton's rent payment. The discovery of the bodies came approximately an hour later, around 10 a.m., when another employee arrived for work only to find the doors locked. Unable to gain entry or reach anyone inside, the employee contacted a nearby Captain D's location. When this also yielded no response, they reached out to another colleague whose father worked in law enforcement. Upon finally gaining access with the assistant manager, they made the horrific discovery of Steve and Sarah's bodies in the cooler, both victims of multiple gunshot wounds from a .32 caliber revolver. A seemingly unrelated discovery would later prove crucial to the investigation. That same afternoon, approximately 11 miles from Captain D's on the Ellington Parkway Highway, a man collecting recyclable cans made an unusual find: identification cards belonging to Steve Hampton's children. The conscientious collector, suspecting possible robbery, alerted authorities. The following day, February 17th, police searching the area discovered a trail of Hampton's personal effects scattered along the highway: his driver's license, credit card, movie rental card, and birth certificate, all discarded like breadcrumbs marking the killer's path. Just 3 days after the murders, Paul's spending patterns raised eyebrows at a local car dealership. He appeared with $2,000 in cash to secure a prepaid lease on a vehicle, a dramatic change from his previous visit when he'd been unable to afford any purchase. When questioned about the source of the funds, Paul fabricated a story about saving money and receiving help from his father. The acquisition of this vehicle would facilitate his next wave of violence. On March 23, 1997, barely 5 weeks after the Captain D's murders, Paul stationed himself in the parking lot of a McDonald's located 3 miles northeast of his first crime scene. As midnight approached and the restaurant prepared to close, Paul waited patiently for employees to emerge from the back exit. When 2 workers stepped out to dispose of garbage, he ambushed them, forcing them back inside at gunpoint. A third employee, caught completely unaware inside the restaurant, became an additional victim as Paul opened fire without hesitation. The victims of this senseless attack were 17-year-old Andrea Brown, 27-year-old Ronald Santiago, and 23-year-old Robert Swell. All 3 succumbed to their wounds, their lives cut tragically short while performing routine closing duties. However, a 4th employee, Jose Gonzalez, was present and became an unexpected complication in Paul's murderous plan. When Paul attempted to shoot Gonzalez, his weapon malfunctioned, a mechanical failure that would prove crucial to the investigation. A desperate struggle ensued, during which Paul resorted to using a knife, stabbing Gonzalez 17 times before leaving him for dead. Believing he had eliminated all witnesses, Paul proceeded to rob the registers and safe, making off with approximately $3,000.
Pause. Before we continue with this story, allow me to share something important with you. Looking at our channel analytics, it's clear that many of you watching our true crime stories are not yet subscribed. In fact, about 85% of our viewers haven't hit that subscribe button. If you're finding value in our content and want to support what we do, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us continue bringing you these meticulously researched true crime stories and ensures you won't miss any future uploads. Now, let's get back to our story.
In what can only be described as miraculous, Jose Gonzalez managed to survive his numerous wounds. Despite being grievously injured, he somehow found the strength to contact emergency services. Though his words were barely comprehensible to dispatchers, his call prompted the immediate deployment of police and paramedics to the scene. They arrived to find the horrific aftermath: 3 victims deceased and Gonzalez clinging to life. The crime scene yielded valuable evidence, including fibers and .625 caliber cartridge casings that would later prove instrumental in linking these murders to the Captain D's killings. However, the bloodshed wasn't over. Paul's reign of terror would claim more victims before justice could catch up with him. 1 month later, on April 23, RJ, 1909, 997, Paul targeted a Baskin-Robbins in Clarksville, Tennessee. Arriving around 10 p.m., he somehow persuaded 2 employees, 21-year-old Angela Holmes and 16-year-old Michelle Mace, to allow him entry despite the store being closed. Once inside the Baskin-Robbins, Paul's pattern of robbery escalated to an even more sinister level. After emptying the cash register and safe, he forced both Angela Holmes and Michelle Mace into his car, a devastating deviation from his previous crimes that would lead to even more tragic consequences. The timing of this crime proved critical, as Michelle's brother routinely picked her up after her shifts. Arriving around 10 p.m., mere minutes after the abduction, he noticed something amiss. While his sister's co-worker's car remained in the parking lot and the store lights were still on, the interior appeared deserted. His instincts warning him of danger, he made the crucial decision to contact law enforcement. When police arrived at the Baskin-Robbins, they found telltale signs of Paul's methodology: an emptied cash register, a dismantled safe, and perhaps most tellingly, the untouched purses of both victims still inside the store. The following morning brought the grimmest discovery yet. The bodies of Angela and Michelle were found at Dunbar Cave State Natural Area, a 110-acre park, roughly 3 miles from the ice cream parlor. Their deaths were particularly brutal, with multiple stab wounds covering their bodies. Yet Paul wasn't finished. His thirst for revenge led him to target Mitchell Roberts, the manager who had fired him from Shoney's. On June 12, 1997, Paul appeared at Roberts' home, initially presenting himself as someone seeking re-employment. However, he carried both a knife and gun, harboring intentions of kidnapping. His plans were thwarted only by the unexpected presence of Mitchell's son, who was filming with a camcorder. Realizing he was being recorded, Paul abandoned his scheme, though not before leaving an impression that prompted Mitchell to contact authorities. By this point, law enforcement had established surveillance around local fast food establishments. Recognizing the pattern of attacks and anticipating the killer might strike again, Mitchell Roberts' report about Paul's suspicious visit proved to be the break investigators needed. When police arrested Paul, the evidence began mounting rapidly. During booking, a crucial piece of evidence emerged. Paul's thumbprint perfectly matched one found on Steve Hampton's movie rental card, discovered by the can collector along Ellington Parkway. This physical evidence provided the first concrete link between Paul and the murders. The case against him strengthened further when Jose Gonzalez, the McDonald's survivor, positively identified Paul as his attacker. Additional witnesses came forward, including 2 Captain D's employees who remembered Paul inquiring about employment before the murders. More damning evidence accumulated. Paul's shoe size matched footprints left at the Captain D's crime scene, and DNA from the Baskin-Robbins victims was found on his shoes. Forensic analysis also linked fibers from Paul's car to evidence found on the Baskin-Robbins victims' bodies. Given the jurisdictional complexities of crimes committed across different counties, Paul faced 3 separate trials. The first trials in 1909-999 addressed the Captain D's and Baskin-Robbins murders, while the McDonald's case went to trial in 2000. Throughout these proceedings, Paul maintained his innocence, though the evidence told a different story. Before the trials began, Paul's defense team raised questions about his competency, citing his history of brain damage and psychological diagnoses. However, these arguments were not permitted as a defense strategy. The trials proceeded, with each revealing more horrifying details of his crimes. In the Captain D's trial, Paul received 2 death sentences, one for each victim, plus an additional 25 years for aggravated robbery. Just before the Baskin-Robbins trial, he attempted to halt proceedings by claiming incompetency. An independent state psychiatrist evaluated him and determined he was fit to stand trial. The jury found him guilty on all counts: 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. Each murder conviction brought another death sentence. The McDonald's trial followed a similar pattern, beginning with extensive pre-trial competency hearings. Once again found competent, Paul faced the consequences of his actions. Guilty verdicts for 3 counts of premeditated murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. Additional death sentences were added to his growing list of punishments. Paul was scheduled for execution on April 29, 2003. On April 14, he wrote to the governor and others, stating he would not pursue any appeals to stop his execution. However, his sister Janet, who had become a lawyer, filed a next friend petition questioning his competency. The federal appeals court accepted this petition, granting a stay of execution just 1 day before it was to be carried out. For the next decade, Paul's case bounced through various courts, undergoing numerous competency hearings. The situation was complicated by Paul's refusal to pursue the post-conviction appeal his sister had initiated, a decision his legal team argued was itself evidence of his incompetence. The Tennessee Supreme Court finally settled the matter in October 2012, upholding all death sentences and ruling that petitions filed on Paul's behalf failed to demonstrate incompetence. However, before a new execution date could be set, Paul died on November 1, 2013, just 11 days shy of his 56th birthday. His death occurred in a Nashville hospital due to heart failure, complicated by pneumonia and respiratory illness. The question of Paul's mental state remained a subject of intense debate. The Texas Supreme Court dubbed him a human conundrum. Evidence showed he was undeniably brain damaged and delusional, believing he was monitored by a secret government organization controlling his mind remotely. He maintained his trials were mock proceedings with lawyers who were actually actors controlled by scientific technology. Yet paradoxically, Paul had admitted to mental health professionals that he faked mental health problems and delusions to avoid prosecution. This created a perplexing question. Was Paul a mentally ill person trying to appear sane, or a sane person feigning mental illness? Various mental health professionals examined Paul throughout his life and trials, often reaching conflicting conclusions. A 1909 198 PET scan revealed atrophy in the left side of his brain, indicating significant dysfunction. A clinical neuropsychologist who conducted extensive interviews in 1909, 998, and 1999 determined Paul had exhibited psychosis since 1978 and developed delusions in the mid-1980s. Looking back at his childhood records, she found his IQ was in the 80s and concluded he met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. Further evaluations by a licensed speech and language pathologist in 1909, 999 revealed speech and language problems consistent with traumatic brain injuries. A Columbia University clinical psychologist, after more than 20 hours of interviews with Paul, discussions with his family, and review of records, diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia spanning 2 decades. Yet paradoxically, Paul demonstrated periods of rational behavior. He had enrolled in community college, earning straight A's in most classes. In 1909, 984, following his theatrical courtroom behavior with the paper hat incident, he wrote a lucid letter to the state prosecutor apologizing for his conduct and requesting a reduced sentence. Mental health professionals testifying for the prosecution acknowledged Paul's brain damage but disputed that it could cause schizophrenia or lead to premeditated murder. Even among experts, consensus proved elusive. For the victims' families, Paul's death brought mixed emotions. Jerry Jackson, father of 16-year-old Sarah, killed at Captain D's, expressed relief that Paul could no longer harm others. Viewing his death as closure, Andrea Brown's father, while wishing Paul had faced execution rather than dying naturally, found solace in his death. He shared that Andrea, just 17, had saved for and purchased a car the day before her murder, a poignant detail highlighting the future stolen from these young victims. The impact of Paul's crimes extended beyond individual families. Fast food restaurants across Nashville began closing earlier, and police increased patrols around these establishments. His rampage fundamentally changed how these businesses operated, leaving a lasting mark on the community. The case of Paul Dennis Reed, Jr. raises disturbing questions about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and the intersection of brain trauma and violent behavior. While his death brought some closure to the victims' families, it also left many questions unanswered about the role of mental health in our criminal justice system. If you found this deep dive into one of Tennessee's most notorious killing sprees informative, please hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Stories Archive. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the connection between brain trauma and criminal behavior? Should Paul's mental state have affected his sentencing? Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated on more true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature. Until next time, stay safe and remember that sometimes the most ordinary places can harbor extraordinary dangers.